So Becky mentioned that today's topic is the truth about as is, selling your home as is with longtime homeowners. What longtime homeowners need to know? So before I bring our panel up, I have a survey of the room I want to do. So by a show of hands, how many of you own a home? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand up if you have lived in your home for more than 10 years. Keep your hand up if you lived in your home more than 20 years. 30 years, keep your hand up if you've been more than 30. More than 40, keep your hand up. We're getting there. More than 45, keep your hand up. Your hand's getting tired yet? More than 50 years, keep your hand up. We've got a few back here. Okay, how long in your current home, sir? 54 years. 61 years. 55 years. Anybody beat 61 years?
Doggy in the back.
She's doing the math. Give her a second. 64 years. Okay, anybody going once, going twice? Okay, give her a hand and I'll tell you why. She wins the trip to Francis Tuttle Tech for the seminar about selling your house as is. Everything. So the reason I wanted to give her an applause is for this. This is a preemptive applause for all the things that she's going to do to prepare at some point to not live in that house anymore. I don't know why she wouldn't live in that house. There's lots of reasons. But after being someplace 64 years or 50 years or 40 years or 30 years or 20 years or even 10 years, it's a lot harder than moving out of a house that you've only lived in for a short time. Can we all agree on that? Okay, great. So if you have lived in your house that long, whatever that long is, you probably haven't necessarily paid that close attention to what's happening in the market. Now some of you do, you follow the market and things like that, but what we're going to do today is we have three very experienced, as Becky pointed out, very experienced real estate agents and brokers, and they're going to talk about some of the nuances of the current market as it relates to home sales as is. Now, why do we say as is? Because how many of you have seen on the corner or in your mailbox or a phone call or a text, a card or a letter or what looks very personal, something that says, I will pay you cash for your house as is, just walk away. Raise your hand if you've got one of those. Yeah. If you haven't, then you don't own a home. Because that's the deal. So what I would contend is that there's mixed messages out there. And so today what we'd like to do is educate everyone, not because we need you to sell your house or want you to sell your house or encouraging you to sell your house, but what we do want is whatever you decide, we want you to be informed. Is everybody good with that? Yeah. Right, informed decisions today are the key, all right? So let's bring our panelists up. Becky, Shannon, and Chris, come on up. Let's give them a round of applause. And we all know each other very well. We all work together very closely and have for a long time. And so we all kind of can complete each other's sentences sometimes, can we? Let's not do that. Can we do that? Not do that today? Oh, turn that on. Yep. Chris and I, obviously, we've been working together in real estate since 1995.
I'll interrupt you regularly.
And he'll interrupt me regularly, so there is no rule around that for him. But Shannon's more respectful. Becky and I, we don't know, it could go either way. Yeah.
I think Becky's the only one that'll follow that rule.
That may be, yeah. So, but what I want you to hear today, guys, as we begin to talk, is we're just going to talk through some of the things that they see on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, as it relates to either clients that they've served or people that they talk to that in the industry. And so then when we get through kind of our initial conversation, you'll have a chance to ask questions. So please jot down on your note sheet. Everybody should have a note sheet that has some truths on the front of it. And then on the back of it, it says notes. That's a great place to write what? Notes. Yay. Okay. So that would also be a great way to write questions down that you want to ask them. And then we will open it up for questions towards the end. And these guys can answer questions for you about the particulars, because you're going to have questions. Okay? And so one other little quick note too, just a reminder. Some of you are going to not want to ask questions publicly, and that's totally fine, however you want to do that. There's a place on the yellow sheet that says, it's the third or fourth question there. It says, do you have any unanswered questions? Note them here and we will follow up. So if you don't get your question answered today, you can write it there, put your name at the bottom, make sure you put your information, and someone will follow up with you after the seminar to answer that question in person. And so you can have a personal conversation. Does that sound good to everybody? Say yes? All right, turn to your neighbor and say, I am so glad you're here today. Now turn back to that same neighbor and say, I'm glad I'm here today too. I know you guys think that I'm corny when I do that, but doesn't it feel good to talk to somebody next to you a little bit? Sometimes those of you who are sitting by yourself, you have to look for somebody. I saw you guys have to look for somebody. All right. Okay, so we're going to start with some basics, okay? Because a lot of people struggle with knowing some terminology, and so terminology is the first thing, right? And you guys go out and you see people's homes every day, and you're there and you're invited to look around and give your evaluation. And we've broken it down into 3 categories of home sale scenarios. That's what we're calling them, okay? And you're probably, when you think about selling a home, and you may not be thinking about selling a home forever or for years from now, but if you were, you would probably fall into one of these 3 areas. So Shannon, let's start with you. I'm going to have you kind of describe for everybody what that middle section is, okay? Where it says majority of homeowners.
Okay, so the typical average home, that the mechanics work. So I'm a big advocate and really like going into people's houses that they tell me I replaced the air conditioner in 2021, the roof was replaced in 2022, the hot water tank was replaced in 1994. That one's a little bad. But overall, mechanically sound. Then you have some outdated decor. You know what? You remodeled your kitchen in 1995, but it still looks really good and you like it. So it may be a little outdated, but it's still well maintained. And then the last is that it's clean and well kept. So it matches the first 2 items. That is the majority of the houses that we go see. And it's probably the majority of the people who are sitting in this room.
Absolutely. I would say, like you said earlier, the people sitting in this room are likely in that category, right? And if you're familiar with the bell curve, right? I love bell curves. Like, to me, it's like that's the audience that we generally serve, and there's always outliers. And so I'm going to talk about those. So Chris, I'll ask you to talk about the completely as-is house. What does that look like, and who falls in that category?
So the completely as-is house is the house that needs the roof replaced. Either it's leaking or there's been significant hail damage on it that it's obvious. A lot of times we have hail damage on a roof and we don't know it. This is when it's kind of completely obvious that your roof needs to be replaced. And then also your AC and stuff is 25 years old, the hot water tank's 35 years old, things like that. It may still work or kind of work, and that's what we run into, is it kind of works and you just make do, and then obviously the unclean or unkept. It's just a lot of clutter, and because of the clutter, maybe it's not been able to be cleaned well. That's kind of the biggest part of the as-is side of it.
So the condition is not great.
Correct.
Okay. And we're going to show some pictures here in a minute to kind of demonstrate the difference between what you might be hearing and saying, okay, that may be my house right now. Like, my house isn't clean. And I'm like, no, you don't know what I mean when I say not clean. So hold that thought. So Becky, talk about the people who are trying to, who are selling their house and they've kind of maximized their equity and what they've done to that house to do that.
Yeah, so on the far end of the bell curve, that's gonna be the people who have either done like a full house remodel, or maybe it's a newer home, things like that. A lot of times what I'll see is they've spent some time on landscaping, landscaping and making sure the curb appeal is really good. That really is a home that is like turnkey. You know, you hear that conversation a lot.
Right. So someone could walk into it, nothing needs to be done. But let's talk about the difference between those two, Shannon, average and remodel, because there's a distinction. I can see you like, okay, tell them. What is it?
The distinction between the average and the maximizing is the people who've put, bottom line, they put a lot of money in their house. That's the people who've replaced their windows. That's the person who has put a workshop in the backyard that has electricity. It has a really fancy stand-up storm shelter in the garage. They have all the bells and whistles that you just kind of go, oh, when you watch them on HGTV. They've added all of those things to their house. So maximizing your equity, people can overdo that. So you may have put more into your house because those are the things you wanted, which is great, absolutely. But you may have outpriced your own neighborhood, so that's where that maximizing equity term comes from.
Yeah, basically you would not be able to get a penny more on an appraisal, right? Like that's when you're maximizing.
Perfect, okay. So I'm gonna go through a couple more scenarios to help you kind of understand why this matters when you're thinking about where your house falls if you were gonna sell it. So this is, the way I visualize this is based on pricing, right? So when we're looking at pricing. So Shannon, start with the as-is pricing and where that lands on the spectrum of houses, right? And yeah.
Boy, you are testing my eyesight today.
I know.
But I can read it, so that's good to know. No, I can actually read it, so this is a good sign.
Yeah.
My eye doctor will be so tickled that I can read it at the back of the room. But anyway, so completely as is. It is in need of repairs, so kind of like what Chris was talking about. Your air conditioner works only if it's under 80 degrees outside and you close all the bedrooms and all the ends. Outdated decor that you have, maybe green appliances, or they might be pink, but that they may be older than your children. Those would be the outdated decor. Unclean and unkept. We're going to talk more about cleaning today than you guys ever really expected when you're talking about as is. This is actually a new pet project of mine. But unclean and unkept, Chris said it really well. If something is completely covered from ground to ceiling and you've not seen the back of that wall in 10 years and you've not been able to clean a bathtub to your standard because of maybe health issues, or you just don't use that bathroom very often, or it's broke, so you've not cleaned it in 10 years because it doesn't work, so why would we clean it? Those are the things you're looking at for completely as is.
Or it's a litter box. I've seen that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, litter box.
And I have cats, and mine's not moved there yet, but I understand, yeah.
Okay, so Chris, so we know that person oftentimes is who the investor's targeting, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so then you've got that next, the pricing on that house. I mean, Shannon, how do you determine pricing on a house that's in really bad shape like that?
Well, you take the value, you take averages. Everything is about averages. So you're going to take the average price in the neighborhood that you start with that typical average house, and then you begin reducing it based on what has to be repaired or improved to meet that average home price. So that's the reason investors are interested, because they're willing to pour the money into it for whatever end result they're looking for, and that varies. But so that's how you begin to price it, is you take that average home in your neighborhood's going to sell for X, and then you begin to reduce it where your property then is only worth R.
Okay, yeah. So Becky, I can see you're kind of like wanting to add on to that.
Yeah, what I'd like to say about pricing an as-is home is that, you know, when an investor is going to make an offer, you have to remember that they're going to build in a profit margin, right? It's a business for them. And so I don't like to necessarily jump right into that. What I would prefer to do is, take a look at it, see what that middle range is, kind of like what Shannon was saying. And I'm not going to take it down as deep as what an investor would like, because there's not a lot of inventory right now for investors, and so we don't have to do that, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm gonna push this next slide up. You can talk about the swing, because that's really what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yes. So do you see how at the top, the investor is gonna buy it down there at the bottom, and then they are going to move it up to the top. They're gonna do those things, but there's gonna be a profit gap that's built into that. And that's okay, like business, and this is, it's okay for businesses to make money. I'm not saying that that's not okay, but you, as the home seller, needs to understand that you will pay that, you will take the hit of that profit, right? And a lot of investors, because there's not a lot of inventory, they're gonna wanna get that middle dollar sign for that bottom, caution, because, so that's where they're gonna come in.
So where you should be is what you're saying is in the middle, because that's where your house is, but they're
They're gonna pay the bottom, and then because it's in the middle, they're gonna just put it right back on the market at that middle price. So they're gonna get it at the bottom, and then there's a lot of investors that they don't even, the next day after you close, they will put it on the market for the other price.
Clean or not clean?
Clean or not clean.
Because they can make the difference.
So the point here is that profit margin that I want you to have in your mind.
Well, when you say when they're going to get it, so how do they get it at the investor? How would an investor go about getting a house at that middle range for investor price? How does
Before we
that
go there, let me show some pictures.
Sorry, too many moderators.
Yeah, right? You've been moderating way too long. We're gonna have to slow your roll, let me moderate, we're good, right?
I wanted to.
We're all moderators, and so they're all up here like, I wanna ask a question. No, that's my job. It's fun. Okay, I told you, this is what it's gonna be. If nothing, it'll be entertaining today. Okay, so I wanna show a couple of pictures so that you can get a sense. Now, just so you know, these are pictures of actual houses that have been sold. You won't recognize who they are because I made that point, because I don't want anybody to think we're showing pictures of someone's home that might be embarrassed by this, and in no way, shape, or form is that the case. I'm going to show you this picture, and this was a person who had lived in this home for a very, very long time and had a health condition as well as some cognitive impairment. Nobody knew. And then when it became a crisis, the person that was her basically fiduciary found this out, and we were able to go in and help her, and she ended up moving and was fine, but it took a bit. So this is a picture of her bedroom. It's like a bay window, and it had broken window panes, and critters were coming in to the house through the broken window pane. Rain had come in and damaged the sheetrock, and it had mold in the carpet and in the wall, which may explain a little bit of her health issues, yes? Now, this is the after it was redone picture. That's the after it was redone picture. Now, Shannon and them pointed out, this didn't take a lot to do. It needed a window, and it needed new carpet, and it needed new sheetrock under the window and paint, yeah? Okay, then this is the final, so you can see the comparison of those two times that we took the pictures. This is the bathroom. And when Shannon mentioned as is being really problematic, what you see there in the tub is animal feces. And I hate to be blunt, but you can only imagine what the rest of the house was like if that's where the wild animals were coming in after they were using the bathroom. This is what that looked like after it was redone. And there is a comparison, okay? Now I got one more for you. This is that same house. This is the kitchen. And my heart hurts for this woman. I mean, it really does. And for the people who cared about her, because she would not let people in her house, you guys. And so nobody knew that it had gotten to this point. And so unfortunately, that kitchen, every appliance was unable to be salvaged. It was just completely damaged. And then this is the after picture. Now that kitchen eventually was totally ripped out, completely remodeled, and completely reconfigured actually as well, okay? So we're gonna do a quick quiz, all right? You guys ready? We're gonna do a quiz. The audience is gonna answer, but these guys are not gonna answer because they're the ones that know the answer. So, would you consider this next picture, the pictures in this next slide, would you, and shout it out, would you consider it average or fixer-upper? Ready? Average or fixer-upper? Good job! Good, right? Okay, excellent. What about this one? Average or fixer-upper? Above average, somebody said. Okay, very nice, yeah, well done. Okay, excellent. Now, this one is the picture on the left versus the picture on the right. So just focus on the picture on the left. Average or fixer-upper? Oh, what happened? Because you saw the comparison, right? Okay. Okay. So we now know the difference, right, between when we think about an as-is property, you guys, and what we're thinking about in the real estate world, what an average property is that should probably sell somewhere in that average range, right? Okay. Now, Shannon, you guys mentioned, I don't remember which one of you brought up, that we should probably talk about how it happens that people who have that house in that average price range end up sometimes maybe thinking their house should sell for less. Is that the comment that was made?
First, can we say that the pictures that you saw where the house was in poor condition, I just want you to know that Shannon and I see that weekly. So that is not anything to be embarrassed of. That is not anything, like life, we all have different journeys to where we've gotten.
100%.
And it is not something, if you feel overwhelmed, I promise that you cannot shock me. You cannot overwhelm me. I promise on everything. So I did want to make sure that you know that if you're sitting here thinking, that's what my house looks like, and I don't want to be a picture up there,
Right.
I want you to know it's okay.
And that's why I prefaced it with, like, we are very sensitive to that, and we will walk through a house and it doesn't faze us, and we appreciate and honor that person. And I was reluctant to even show those pictures because I didn't want anybody to think that that was a disparaging thing to do. This was many, many years ago that happened. So anyway, Shannon, go ahead.
No, my question or the answer?
Either way, go ahead.
Well, I'll ask the question because Becky will answer it better than I will. So the question is how does somebody who's in that average or how do they not sell to an investor at that investor price? How does that happen? Or how does it happen?
I think I understand where you're going. So most of the time what I see when someone sells to an investor, it's because of one of two reasons. They either feel overwhelmed and they just need to get it gone, or more often than not, they're uninformed about what average is and what their home is really worth. And so maybe they've lived in their house for 40 or 50 years, and my dad and I were having this conversation the other day actually. Like if someone bought their house for $3,500 in 1960 and someone offers them $100,000, that sounds like a pretty good return, like done and sold. But what if their house is worth $175,000, right? And you just don't know because you're still kind of in your mind operating on that 1960 dollar. And that's what happens most frequently because they think that person is being honest, but honest with them about their home's value.
We're going to talk about strategy in a second.
Okay.
Strategy of who? Strategy of
the
who?
investor, yeah. So to your point, Chris, could you share maybe about your mom and dad and their house and the value of their house and how we had to try to convince your dad that their house is worth more than
So, when you look at the fact that they bought it in December of 1971, and I don't know what they paid, but it was somewhere in the
$18,000.
Yeah, it was $10,000 to $20,000. And then trying to explain to my dad that it's worth 200 or more, it doesn't compute when you look at, I only gave X. But it's like, but it's been so long, it's called appreciation. Homes appreciate over time. So you really have to get that honest opinion of what the value of your house is. And the fact is what we were showing earlier, average is versus what you think your house is. If you're watching HGTV and you're looking at HGTV and you go, that's average, I need significantly less because mine doesn't look like that, that's so not true. Especially when you look at neighborhoods, and you can look at neighborhoods that have that, I'm just gonna reference that HGTV look, and then the average look of the house, and the price difference is not significantly different. So the swing between average and great or exceptional is not a whole lot. So the value of going there is for you. You love your house, you want to do those things, you want to make it look that way, that's for you. That's not necessarily to increase the value of your house based on the dollars you put in it.
Okay, you just went down a different little trail.
Want to go down the investor side of that?
Not yet. No, not yet. So I do want to address though the thing that I think the elephant in the room, and that is that, well, you know, a lot of people live in areas where their houses may be smaller, and they're tearing these houses down, and they're building these big monstrosities, right, in these areas that normally were smaller houses. Like we've seen this in lots of different pockets of the city. So how does that affect price, and as is selling a house as is as well? And I know I'm throwing this out at you guys last minute here, but I want to address that.
Well, and it's a good question, and I'm going to tell you, it's a matter of who's buying it. So it depends. So it depends on how quick you need to sell your house. You need to value it and have a valuation for it both ways, and it's about being educated. So knowing what's going on in your neighborhood, knowing what the comparison is if I'm selling it for land only, someone's going to come in here, tear it down, and move on. Or if someone may want your house as it stands, and they want to fix it because they may not be able to purchase a home otherwise. So it's about who that buyer is as well as who the seller is. It's a negotiation. It's a negotiation, but it's a really different relationship that you're building with the public, which is going to be your buyer, and knowing who that is. A huge part of what we do is trying and looking at a home to determine who that buyer is. That's part of that discussion when you're in those pockets and it may not be tearing it down, it may be that it's in a pocket in a neighborhood that renters are landlords are snatching it up, investors, and they're turning your neighborhood into a rental neighborhood. So not tearing it down, but they're renting it. So it's different situations.
I was going to go there kind of next, but so you had one property not too long ago, it was over the Nichols Hills area, that if you were kind of in that quandary, like this could be an end user buyer that fixes it up and keeps it like it is, or it could be somebody tear it down and build a house there.
We actually had both.
Yeah.
The house, I'll just throw myself under this. The house that I would have told you should have been torn down and probably sprinkled a whole bunch of deodorizer on the house before you built on it, somebody bought and renovated that house. It's now beautiful. She put a lot of effort, a lot of love. She loved the house. It was her house. She bought it, but that was the buyer, but she loved that house. She would never have thought about tearing it down. Then we had another house that I loved. I liked the layout. It was built on different things, still over in the Nichols Hills area. And the person who bought it tore it down. And I would never have thought that house would have been torn down. So you can't always predict it, but you have to know the value of both, and that both of those could be the scenarios. You don't get to pick what the buyers do with your house.
Yeah, say that again.
You do not get to pick what the buyer does with your house because it's no longer your house.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the rental neighborhood thing, because that is another concern I've had from people that guys I've milled around today. My house is a typical house in a typical neighborhood, but I don't want to sell it to an investor. But that seems to be who is buying homes in my neighborhood. Talk about why that might be, why that's trending, and how somebody might need to look at that scenario. Becky, you want to go with that one? Sorry, I'm throwing that out there kind of.
I can
right?
No,
Yep.
I got you.
Speak from the hip, girl.
Okay, I can do it. Okay, so we do get a lot of calls from people who say, you know, there's a lot of rent. In fact, I have a lot of people moving out of neighborhoods because they don't want to live around a lot of renters. So a few things about that. Know your options, right? Don't update something that's going to hurt your feelings if somebody comes and tears it out. Seriously, don't drive by your house again after you've sold it, because it will hurt your feelings, because renters don't landscape, right? Like, you can pick a neighborhood, if you're looking for houses and you drive through and the landscaping is terrible, I'm gonna tell you right now, there's a lot of renters in there, because they do not spend their money on landscaping. So what I would tell you, if you were trying to weigh your options, there's a buyer for every house. Buyers follow a similar bell curve to sellers, right? I think it's important to know that buyers also live in bell curves. And there are a lot of buyers, particularly in this market, that want to start owning a home, and the real estate market is difficult right now, and they have come to terms with the fact that this is not going to be their forever house. And so your home in a house with lots of renters around actually would be a smart purchase for them, because I tell people all the time, if you can purchase a home and hold it, like, let's talk about somebody who is 35 years old. Because the average homeowner, the average first-time homeowner right now, according to the latest numbers, is 38 to 39 years old. That's shocking, right? So let's say someone is early 30s, they want to start owning real estate, buy that house, live in it, and then when they become able to, purchase another house but hold that house. That's smart, right? Like, that's a good retirement plan. We talk to people about that all the time. Try to hold on to your real estate. So that house would be really, really good for a homeowner to live in. And I would say also, you know, that biggest portion of the bell curve, they're going to be able to buy that house and they're going to be excited about it. You do not need to do a lot of updates to that house, but I'm going to harp on what Shannon said. It has to be clean. Now, a deep clean can be kind of expensive, but it will gain you more. So let's say you do a deep clean, which y'all hold on to your seats, but maybe $750 for a deep, deep clean for your house, okay? Maybe a little bit more if you need to have grout steamed and things. But that money that you're spending will help you, because buyers, particularly inexperienced buyers, will walk into a dirty house and think that they didn't keep the house clean, they've not maintained the other systems. So you could have a new roof and a brand new heat and air system, but if your house is not sparkling, they're going to make judgments about the updates that you've done. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Or the quality of the updates. Well, if they can't clean their house, they probably got shoddy air conditioner, and there's no telling who put that roof on.
Yeah, the assumptions that are made. Okay, so I do want to talk about the shifting market. Okay, I want you all to address the shifting market. You know, those of us who've been in real estate since the 90s, we've seen it do this, right? Some of you have seen it do that more times. Market shift, right? And so, Chris, kind of talk about what we've seen in the market since, let's just say 10 years ago, when we came back to Oklahoma after being gone for a while. 10 years ago, where the market was, and now kind of where it's trending. And then I'll have these ladies kind of tie it up with a nice neat bow about the recent trends. Yeah.
So if you look at going back about 10 years, the market at the time, we obviously had 07, 08. You know, it was a horrible time for real estate, financing, the whole 9 yards. But within about 8-9 years, well, especially for Oklahoma, you know, had less of a downturn and a faster rebound, so the prices were getting back in line by that point. But it was just an average market at that point. There wasn't anything exceptional about it. It was just your typical bell curve market, just like what she was showing you about 10 years ago. Now, if you roll forward, market obviously with COVID went nuts. So we had an average increase over those few years. We hit 2020 and things went crazy. And the interesting part about that is a lot of it, I say a lot of it, some of it was investors, a lot of it were end users. Now, the end users that were buying were we're absolutely challenged in the aspect of competing. I'm sorry, the person who's going to live in it forever, owner occupied. Yeah, not an investor, but someone who's an owner.
Because of inventory, right? Is that what
Because
you're-
inventory went to near nothing. I mean, so if you wanted a house, it came on the market, 30 people, 40 people looked at it, we got 15, 20 offers, sometimes way more, and it was just accelerated over. So that has happened, and we've been out of that market since really early 2023? 2022? Okay, since 2022. And we've been,
Becky said the other day, we have officially been out of that market longer than we were in it.
Okay.
so with that in mind, is now we're returning to a more normalized market. And I say normalized meaning we're getting into the whole, it's pretty typical, you've got to satisfy the buyer has say on how much they're willing to pay, you have to say on how much you're willing to sell, obviously, but buyers dictate what values of homes are. So we're moved back to that average typical market, and values on the other hand have obviously not been jumping like they were in previous years, but they're steady. They're back to where they need to be. Oklahoma has always been a very steady market to be in. Even in the horrible times, they go down a little bit, but then it picks back up and kicks back. So that's kind of the last 10 years. So we're back in that typical
What we call balanced.
real estate, roughly balanced market. Yeah.
Okay, so based on that, how does that impact also, remember, I'm all about psyche, right? Like our brains are our problem, just so y'all know, right? If we have a problem, it's our brains. Because we have a memory. Everybody in the room, some of you are going, mine's not great. Well, you still have one, or you wouldn't be here, I'm just saying. Our memories are part of the problem. So as this market has shifted in the past 10 years, and we had ups and downs, and now we're back to kind of we're in a weird place. Because people are still thinking about the neighbor down the street back in 2020 that, sold their house for some crazy dollar because the buyer couldn't find a house. What's happening, Becky, now when you go out and try to talk to people about pricing their home?
Yeah, so we're actually 3% down from where we were last year as far as homes being sold. So we are kind of seeing a little bit of a tapering off. You need to know that as a seller. You need to know that your house is, I had a house that got 72 offers during the craze. Yeah, 72 offers on it, and the paperwork on that
You
was
left it on the market way too long. What, 3 hours?
Yeah. So it's important for you as a seller to have proper expectation, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot when we sit down and talk with the seller. Let's talk about the expectations that you, and if I can surprise you, I want to do that, but as on the good end. But we're setting like this is how long houses are selling on the market. This is the average for your neighborhood. And not all real estate agents pull this, but in our office, we pull what people are paying in closing costs, because I think you should see that. Thank you. I'm not awesome at the mic thing. So we also pull what sellers in your neighborhood have paid in closing costs for buyers, because that's something that you don't see on public record. You see it on the back end. So we pull that for you as well.
So let's hold that thought. We'll come back to that. Those of you are going, what's she talking about? We're going to come back to that. That's okay. But talk about that whole idea of, well, how far back, Becky, when you're looking at those numbers with people, do you go?
Oh, that's a great point. So appraisers will only go like 4 to 6 months, and that's if nothing else has sold. If several things, if they can get 3 comparable sales in your area, they're going to go as close to your sale as possible. I try to keep my numbers within 3 months of the sale of your home. I tell people that your numbers can change every 45 days.
So it doesn't matter how much something
It does
sold.
not. It doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter last year. It doesn't really matter 6 months ago, because that's how quickly the real estate market shifts.
And it should be your neighborhood. So it's not, the further out you go, the less accurate it is, because think about where you live. Your neighborhood probably doesn't look like the neighborhood next to you, the addition next to you. It could have been built in different decades. So that's also really important, not only time, but location.
And I think it's also important that you know that because inventory is low, That's why you're getting the calls and the postcards from the investors. And again, I want to tell you, like, that's what, you do you, but I want you to call someone first before you do that. Yeah.
Let's ask one question to the audience.
Right.
How many of you have received postcards from investors for your
I've
house?
already done that question. What about you?
That's pretty much everybody here.
Yeah, I have too. I had a phone call on my house. Yeah, I got a phone call on my house this week, and I was like, that's okay. I think I have it under control.
Okay, so hold on. Before we go to talking about investors, I do have one additional question to ask you guys about just home buyers in general, not investors, but end user, owner occupant home buyer. You mentioned, Becky, earlier, the average is somewhere in the late 30s. Average first-time buyer. Guys, I bought my first house when I was 20. How many of you bought your first house when you were right out of high school, or right out of the war, or right out of college? They're waiting because for a lot of reasons. Okay, but here's what I want you to hear about this. When they're buying a house, there are some challenges to them buying a house that can affect you as the seller. So Becky,
I got you.
Shannon, Shannon, go first. All right.
Okay,
We're flipping a coin.
Okay, we are. Okay, so the reason is I was driving into work into here today, and it hit me that I'm sitting on this panel with these amazing people, and then it hit me that I'm the newbie on the block. I am the oldest sitting up here by a few months, and I'm the newest kid on the block. So I'm going to tell you from the newest kid on the block, and that's 10 years, but I'm still the newest kid. Actually, about 2 months being the oldest, and 2 months being the rookie of the group. So just little statistics.
I'll get tests on that later.
So you can write that down. But anyway, but what hit me was when I started 10 years ago, house being clean meant that it looked like your grandma was coming over. Everything was wiped down, everything was neat and clean and put away. And vacuumed, that was good. And walked a little bit, but you were good. That was a clean house. But the buyer was different 10 years ago than it is now. The buyer now, being 39 years old, talking about their psyche, they have been renting, let's just say they moved out of their house, we're going to be generous, at 25. They moved out at 25, from 25 to 39, they have been renting houses or renting apartments. When you rent an apartment, every time you go into the apartment, you may not like the amenities, but it is sparkling clean because it's just been painted. It has new carpet because they most of the times are legally bound as a landlord for those things to happen. So when they walk into a used house at 39 and it is not sparkling clean, and meaning not everything is fresh, they then begin to diminish the value of it because that's not their standard.
They turn their nose up at it, kind of.
It's not their standard, and that's not even HGTV. First 5 years of my real estate, we blamed it on HGTV. Well, the last 2 years, bless HGTV's heart, it's not their fault no more. It is because this is their standard of the average age of the buyer.
Or that buyer just moved out of their parents' house, whose house was also sparkling clean because mom kept it that way, and they moved out, now they have the same expectation.
I think I know where you're going
Yeah,
with
go ahead.
some. Okay.
Yeah.
So, how many of you have had your homeowners insurance go up substantially in the last couple of years? Yeah. How many have you noticed that your property taxes have gone up? Okay.
And HOA fees.
And your HOA fees. How many have noticed that interest rates have gone up? Yeah. Okay. So when our first-time homebuyers are looking at houses, one of the reasons why they're waiting so long, in my opinion, from the inside looking in, is that it's very expensive. Money is expensive to borrow. Your home is expensive to insure. And then you've got property taxes to think about as well, particularly in some areas of Oklahoma City where a lot of our buyers would like to live because they have school-aged children, and
The taxes are higher.
and the taxes are higher because of that particular school district, okay? So when they're looking at your house, and the way that affects them is not only their mortgage payment, but it's also going to affect them on their closing costs because that lender is going to require them to keep an escrow. They're going to have to start an escrow account, right? Now, If you own your home outright and you pay your insurance all in one bulk and you pay your taxes all in one bulk, then you see that a couple times a year and then you move on with your life, right? But that buyer is having to put down more money, that is more money out of pocket, and a higher interest or a higher payment, okay? Think about how that affects a home buyer in the market right now. It's very difficult. And so they will be asking you to help them with some of their closing costs. And they will be picky about your home because they are not in a situation, now they're okay with buying a dated home, but they're not okay with doing like replacing carpet because that money that they would typically have to replace carpet is going towards their down payment.
Okay, so let's stop there. I'm gonna recap real quick. You guys heard her say, so interest rates, taxes, insurance, all the things that are going to buy a house. Let's say that this buyer, this first-time buyer, it may not even be a first-time buyer, it could be a move-up buyer too, right? They're cash strapped, like they have just enough, right? Just enough to get the loan, to get qualified, and they know they do want to do some things to that house. What might they ask a seller to do so that they can save a little bit of that money in their bank account? Let's talk about closing costs. Shannon, do you want to talk about that?
Well, they ask for closing costs. That's pretty easy. That's the most direct answer you're gonna get today.
What do you mean they ask for them?
They ask for it.
They ask who?
They ask the seller.
Oh, they want
ask
you to pay for them.
As a seller to pay part of their closing costs. Now that varies based on the house. It depends on the neighborhood and the value because they are limited to a percentage based on the type of loan that they take of what they can ask for. So
let's say, use a number. So let's say let's say it's a $200,000 house, and the buyer says, gosh, I'm gonna offer this person $200,000, but they're asking for some closing costs to be paid for by the seller. What does that look like? I mean, you can't give an exact number, but.
Well, so there's different scenarios. So somebody can, and it's an ask. So I'm gonna say the word ask.
Yeah.
Because an offer is always an ask. As a seller, it's your home, you get to say yes or no. So, but the ask is that they may ask for $3,500, especially if they're knowing that they want to replace the carpet. So they want to be able to not pay that $3,500 at closing. They're going to keep that out of their pocket, and they're going to have you pay them the $3,500 that would go towards that closing cost. Then they can use that cash to replace the carpet. So they have readily available cash. Because what all of us know in this room as homeowners, our home is our best investment, but it's not liquid. So you can't just instantly get HELOCs, but that's a whole other topic. But it's not liquid money. So they're trying, especially if they're mortgaged, correct. So you have to be able to have some kind of liquid funds. So that's often why they'll ask for it. But as a seller, you have the option to be able to negotiate that if that's higher, lower, or a different scenario. There's lots of scenarios there. But that's just an ask.
So it's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation.
So on the negotiation side, you got three things you can do. You can accept it, you can reject it, you can modify it. So keep that in mind is that anything they ask, and I think what Becky brought up earlier was they're looking at your neighborhood, they're looking at what concessions were paid, and they'll literally line them out for you. You know, this property sold, and they paid $12,000 in concessions. This property sold, they paid $3,000. This property sold, they paid none. But that gives you an idea that in your neighborhood, have an expectation that, yes, we can price it here, but we're always talking about net. Bottom line of what you leave closing with is the main thing to focus on. And even with repairs and closing costs and things like that, on an average house, you're going to be way better off selling it to someone who's going to own or occupy. They're the ones that are your best buyer for your value for what you're looking at. So that's kind of our focus is if we can get one message across up here, is that your house is most likely average or better. There are probably very few in your room, if any, that have the house on the other end. And because of that, when people are saying your house is worth X, understand what their motivation is and what they're telling you. If there's someone there to sell it for you, is different than someone who's there to buy it from you. Because if I'm buying it from you, I want the best deal I can get from me, not the best deal you get.
Okay, so let's dive into that. So home investors have a tendency to make it sound really good. Like easy. Yeah, easy, we're gonna give you cash, we're gonna pay you fair market value. okay, if you're a homeowner and somebody offers you fair market value, your mind goes where? Well, whatever the market will bear, right? But
Goes
what
to
is
Zillow.
or whatever Zillow says, or Realtor.com says, or the assessor says, right? What does an investor, when they say fair market value, what does that really mean? Becky, do you want to take this one, or Chris? Who wants to take it?
I'll take it.
Okay, go.
So they're going to look at fair market value on your property, and they're going to say, okay, so we're going to assume as is value, not if you're average, but they're going to look at it as is. And then they're going to tell you everything that's wrong with it. It needs a new kitchen, it needs 2 new bathrooms, it needs this, it needs that. So they're going to take that as is price and then start deducting all of those expenses to make that remodel. Now, what they're not explaining to you well, and if you're not really cognitive of what your property is really worth, when they're done, they're shooting for usually above average price point to resell. So everything from what you paid to what they sell it, what they told you your house was fair market value, and then what they end up selling for is their profit. Now, they're in business to make money, but understand, you need to make sure that you're best represented and understand the true value of your property. But that's the rough guidelines of how they do that in their ads.
60% of actual value is what I'm told. Is what
Yeah, well, and I think it's also really, really important that this is important. Investors are not regulated. They can come in and tell you, your home is worth X, and if you sell it to me, you'll be able to avoid repairs, real estate expenses, all of the, closing costs, you'll be able to avoid all of that. Is this a good time for
Yeah,
me to
this
tell?
is perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I want to tell you a story. So, and it's true. So there was a home that Mom got a card in the mail, and the investor came and talked to her and said, I'll pay you $100,000. Luckily, son saw that before she signed paperwork, and he said, that's fine, Mom, but let's just check this out first. So he called me and he said, so I ran numbers on it. The house was in pretty poor condition, so I said probably an investor will buy this, but let me run numbers. So I ran numbers and I looked at it and I said, an investor will probably, if we clean it, it had all of the personal items that she no longer wanted. She'd already moved out of the property. It had a lot of discarded personal items in it. And I said, if we clear it out and put it on the market as is, I'll sell it for about $200,000. And they said, okay, but he said we could leave everything in it, and he didn't care. And I said, you want to leave everything in it? And she said, yeah, I just want to hand you the keys and be done with it. And I said, okay, well, let's price it at $175 then. We priced it at $175, and she said, now he said it was going to be fast, and I wouldn't have to pay closing costs. I said, totally fine. Y'all, I put that house on the market for $175. We got 3 offers, closed on it in about 3 weeks. At first, $170 is what we ended up taking. All of the items in there, like literally, and it was to an investor. So an investor off market is going to want the best deal because he doesn't want competition, right? And so when you put that out, that's the only way as a real estate agent. Putting your home on the market is the only way to know what market value is, right? Because market value, the definition of market value, is the point at which what a seller is willing to accept meets what a buyer is willing to pay. Okay, that's the definition. You don't know what a buyer is willing to pay for your home until it's on the market. And you don't know the outliers, right? You don't know the outliers that maybe I don't know. Maybe somebody 2 houses down needs their grandparent to live close, and they're probably willing to pay more than somebody who it's just a house to them. So think about that. They're not regulated, and there's a big difference.
So that's a perfect story, great illustration of that. So, and some people in the room might be saying, yeah, but they had to pay a real estate commission.
I don't charge $70,000.
I was gonna say, even after the real estate commission, you guys, that person came out way ahead of the game. Chris, you have a similar story. This one related to a senior living community.
Yeah, we weren't actually involved in the transaction, but there was someone who actually, and it's ending here. And so we were mailing and kind of catching up when she hadn't been around. So we got her mail back that her house, that she no longer was there. So we looked it up, looked at what happened. and looked at what she sold it for, looked at the pictures of the investor who literally the day it closed, it was active in MLS. So, and with, iPhone pictures, nothing done, just absolutely, literally like she moved out.
It still had her stuff in it.
Oh yeah, there was
They
some
didn't
stuff
do
in the house. They did
anything.
nothing. She took what she wanted and left what was left. And sold it for $58,000 more within 2 days. So basically, his outlay or her outlay of the capital to purchase the house turned around and made about a 40% return in less than 30 days. Who wouldn't want to do that? But at the same point, I'm going to use a word here, and it's okay. Who wants to be a victim of that?
Yeah.
And I say victim because you probably don't know what you don't know.
She didn't know.
And that's the hard part.
Well, the thing is that when someone tells you something's easy, have them put dollars to it. So they told her the truth. It was easy for her to leave and walk away, but they didn't tell her the cost of that. Meaning that, well, if you don't want to clean it out, that's fine. We can have it cleaned out for $250. We can have the house cleaned for $500. We can do X, Y, Z, and it's going to total about $2,000 and an extra 30 days for you to make an additional $45,000.
And you're going to handle all of those things.
And someone else is going to handle all of those things. Or they can just hear the term easy, simple, and I'm going to write you a check, but you're going to leave $50,000 on the table.
Or whatever.
Or whatever. But it's a matter of education and knowing the options. If you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you a really bad prognosis, 9 times out of 10, you get a second opinion. So with the major investment that you have, why would you not ask for a second opinion? Someone comes and says something and it sounds really too good to be true. Well, it may be. Or too bad that it makes you cry. Well, it may be. Get a second opinion. That's what we're for.
So I'm going to say this because I don't want them to have to say it, because I can say a lot of things other people can't. Because remember, this is the Truth Series, right? Yes? Yes. Unfortunately, because...
Time to change glasses, but you guys sit still.
Okay, so because the inventory, like they said, is so low and there's not a lot of houses available out there to purchase, investors, which are also called professional home buyers, by the way, they're desperate. And so what's happened is they have gone into some of our senior living communities, mainly assisted living and some independent living. And they have convinced marketing people, who are well-meaning marketing people, that they can help their new residents move in faster without having to do all the work. And so those marketers are like, well, that's great. That's a great resource. But because that marketing person doesn't realize that this person is a home investor, because you know what they call themselves? Senior transition specialists. Interesting. And there is, like Becky said, no law against that. So
Well, there
now,
actually is a little bit of a law against it.
yeah, well, not any with any teeth. So that marketer who really means well recommends home investor to client, resident trusts them because they trust the person at the community, and then guess what? They get fleeced. So I'm telling you this because you may go to a seminar at a senior living community and listen to someone talk like we're talking about buying and selling houses, and they absolutely do not have your interests at heart, right, Eddie? Yeah. So I had Eddie actually go to one of those seminars for me because they would recognize me, and he recorded it for me. And I have the transcript of him lying to a room full of people about what he could and couldn't do. It was embarrassing, by the way. It's embarrassing. And I'm going to tell you, some of them are associated with a licensed realtor. And so they'll say, I'm a licensed realtor, and you better double check their references, you guys. Because just because they say that does not mean that they're operating under that license. You guys follow me? All right, enough of my soapbox. Okay, so I want to finish this with, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. But I want to finish this with home inspections, okay? Because when a buyer who's gonna live there, or even an investor, writes a contract, they accepted the contract, there's almost always an inspection, yeah? What are they looking for in a home inspection? And what might that look like for somebody, let's say, with an average house? Okay, Becky, I'll start with you.
Okay, I love that. Okay, so a home inspector is looking for, does it function as intended? They're not gonna look at your carpet, they're not gonna tell you that, you know, there's something wrong with your paint, they don't care about that. Does the outlet work? Is there the right differential on your heat and air system? Because there's a deviance that they have, that your AC should maintain, right? And so that is what they're looking at. Does it function as intended? I do have some sellers that like to have that information up front. So I do have some sellers that will want to pre-inspect. I'm going to caution you against that. Maybe talk to somebody about it first, because it's good to have the information, right? But a lot of my homeowners will feel like because somebody says it's wrong, they have to fix it. And I'm going to tell you that when the buyer's going to do their own home inspection, and even if you fixed everything on the list that the other inspector found, that new inspector is going to be he's going to want to be worth his money, so he will find some things. So if there's something really, if your roof needs to be replaced, I would say call the ambassador. We've got an education partner, have a look at the roof, right? That would be something good to know up front. But leave a few things that need to be fixed, because there's going to be negotiation power for you as a seller.
So what happens when that let's say if you have another agent, they bring their buyer and they do a home inspection, you get a report. What's that report called?
Home inspection, treatment, repair, replacement?
Treatment, repair, replacement report?
Mm-hmm. Well, you get a home inspection report.
Yeah.
And then from the home inspection report, which home inspection reports average about 41 pages. It's kind of scary when you think about 41 pages of what's being told about your house. Don't worry about that. Because a lot of it says it works. This works, that works. But it's 41 pages. So I tell my clients, when you see it, 41 pages, do not panic. It's not all wrong. But from that 41 pages, the buyer gets to select a request of what they want to be repaired. And that's called a treatment, repair, replacement list.
That's what you take and sit down with the client.
Correct.
Okay.
So out of that 41 pages, they pick what's most important to them. You cannot predict what a buyer is going to put on their, we call it TRR. So you cannot predict it. We all come with our own baggage. How many of us in our life have had a roof collapse, or a hot water tank explode, or an air conditioner that they've had to replace 5 times? We each have different experiences, right, with our homes. So that means our buyers also have those different experiences. So the weirdest thing is going to be really, really important to them. It's going to be their line in the sand. So you can't predict it. That's why the pre-inspection, and it's also not a grade. That's the other thing I need everyone here to know. It's not a pass or fail. So you don't get an A++. In my 10 years, I've had one house that the home inspector found 2 things wrong, and my home seller proved him wrong on one of them. But you need to know it took him 3 years to get that house to the A++ standard. And it really didn't get him any more money. And that house is a whole other report. But anyway, that's another conversation.
Okay, so when you have that report and they've already negotiated the sales price and everything, but now they're asking for them to do these repairs. Chris?
So, well, there's 2 bites of the apple, so to speak. So the first bite is, this is what I'm going to offer you for the house. These are the terms I'm going to ask. These are the concessions or the things I'm asking you to pay for. And then they come back and go, okay, I've done an inspection, now I want this, and this. Or give me money. I mean, there's always options around this. So we always try to prep you that, this is just round 1 of negotiations. We're going to have another round of negotiations. And the one thing that we haven't talked about yet is if it's someone who's going to own or occupy the house and they have some sort of government-backed financing, FHA, VA, there may be a 3rd round of appraisal required repairs, which does happen as well. So it's all of these things we have to look at up front. And most of the time, we're not going to give you and I'm speaking for me, my experience in the past, I'm not going to give you the inspection report. until I have what they're asking for. Because the last thing I need you to do is sweating over everything that's an inspection report, because most of it's not terribly relevant until we get what they're asking for.
And I'm not going to present a home inspection and a TRR, a treatment repair replacement list to you until I have estimates of what that list is going to cost you, or what you're going to be able to select from that list with numbers. Because you have a list of repairs, some of them could cost $10. And some of them cost me an email to a window guy telling the inspector that he's wrong. And that's free.
So a good agent
Yes.
will know if that list is legitimate or not. And if there's something on that list that is, let's say they ask for carpeting on the list, Becky, does that belong on the TRR?
No.
Countertops?
Yeah, no. And also if they say, if they say something like, you need to get the, my inspector thinks that the foundation needs to be checked out, I'm gonna pop that back to them and say, that is not our responsibility, that is your responsibility, you must inspect the property. But I think one thing that might resonate with you, kind of resonates with some of my clients, is if you were to get that inspection report, and let's say for instance, it says that something is wrong with your electric panel. I mean, that's pretty common, right? And so you think, well, I'm gonna have an electrician come over here and fix that. But the buyer hasn't asked you to do that. What if the buyer's an electrician? He don't care if that's wrong. He can come in and fix it himself. What if the buyer sells windows? He don't care. So don't go fixing things until we have an opportunity to tell you what the buyer wants. And I think that's a great idea, is to not send the report over, because what happens a lot is if my seller gets the report before we hear what the buyer wants, then I go over there and they say, I fixed this and this and this and this. And I said, well, that was very nice of you. The buyer did not ask for that.
Or they call the people on the television to come fix the air conditioner and pay $40,000 for a new air conditioner instead of just doing what we would have had them do, which is have it repaired for, $100.
Or just have it serviced.
Have it serviced.
I'm gonna say this, if you see a commercial on TV and they're paying a celebrity or someone to be on their commercial, guess who's paying for that? It's you, when you call for the service. So
We have more affordable options than that.
there are more affordable options
Okay,
than
so
that.
I've got to open it up for questions. We're about there. Is there anything you want to add before I open it up for questions that's burning right now that like you go, I got to tie this loose end up? Okay.
You have options. You have so many options. And selling your home as is to an investor is an option. And we can absolutely look at that. I will not come in and tell you not to do that. I will come in and I will show you all your options, and ultimately it's your decision.
Yeah.
Now, we have had an instance, you went on a listing appointment, and she's looking at what we say the house will sell for, our comps of the house, and she goes, I have an investor that'll pay me X. And she goes, here's this, here's your net, here's what the investor's offering, here's your net. They were so close, it's like, do the investor. The investor has made you a reasonable offer for your house. That's not a bad solution. It's a matter of knowing your options and being educated about the value.
Now, the caveat to that, I will say, is that that was the offer, and my caveat was, now, if that's what they've agreed to, great, but if they come back and inspect the house and then come back to you later and say, well, after looking at the house a little closer, I want you to replace the roof or do all these things, then you know that that initial offer was just bogus. It was just the opportunity for them to say, oh, yes, I have a buyer. Now they're going to try to renegotiate that.
Well, and one more thing is that they may be, we're going to call them an investor, but in the real world, they're a wholesaler. So they're tying up your house at X price with the intent to sell that contract to someone else for a profit, and may have no means to close.
Right.
Meaning that deal's not going anywhere. As soon as they get to the end of those inspection periods, they're canceling the contract with you, they're taking their earnest money back, and they're moving on, and you've wasted time with someone who can't qualify. So if you have an investor, do your best to know that they actually can qualify and close, and call us, because we can look up and see if they own anything.
And we can look at
If
the
they don't,
contract.
if they don't own anything, they may not be a valid investor at the time.
Okay.
Mine real quick.
Yep.
Is when you use the term as is, remember that your term of as is different than the buyer's. When buyers hear as is, they instant question is what's wrong with it. When you're saying normally as a seller, when someone says as is, you're saying, listen, I'm not fixing piddly stuff in this house. I've left it in good shape and this is where it needs to be. So just know it's about perception with that term.
Okay. Yeah, so, and by the way, I know every realtor has a different philosophy on this. I want to point this out. You can talk to 10 different real estate agents, and they're all going to have a different way of dealing with these things, okay? And the way some of them deal with them is whatever offer the investor sends me, we're going to take it. And they don't care because it's easy and it can close fast. Then you've got agents like these guys who are like, okay, how am I going to make the most out of this for my client? And I'm going to tell you guys, there's a big difference. Chris and I have been coaching real estate agents all over the country for the better part of 15 years. And not all real estate agents are created equally. They're just not. So know that just because these guys are saying this is how it should look, I'm not telling you that's how it's going to look every time. So you have to ask questions, okay? All right, so I'm going to open it up. You're going to ask the question, and then I'll point out, and we're going to field. Oh, you do have a mic. Okay, great. Thank you. Yes?
This is on? Okay. I have 3 questions.
One question.
One question?
One question. I got a whole room full of questions. Start with your first one.
Okay. Well, I was wondering about, you think, well, I need to replace the carpet, the kitchen cabinet or countertops need to be replaced, the bathroom shower, all that stuff. And you're going to spend maybe $40 or maybe more $1,000 fixing all this stuff up. Would it be better to just say, let the buyer fix that up instead of doing that, or would it increase the value of it?
So my question, so I have some things I already know need to be done. What I'm hearing him say is they're all really cosmetic. And his question is, should I do it or should I just sell it like it is and let the buyer do it? Okay, Shannon?
It depends. But I'm going to tell you, what Becky does and what I do really well is we give you the different numbers. So it's a numbers game. So all the things you just said are about estimates and about how much is your house worth if you don't do it, how much is your house worth in the middle if you do it, and then do you make that money back? So if you put $40,000 in it, are you going to get $40,000 back or more, or are you going to get less? That's all depends. That's where you have good conversations with people and you get the numbers for your specifics.
Well, and I'm going to add to that real quick too. What Shannon just said is, here's the thing. They know your neighborhoods. You only know your house. And what you need to do in your neighborhood, that's why she said it depends. Where you live and what other houses are like in that neighborhood will dictate whether or not that needs to be done or at what level it needs to be done. Yeah, okay, great. All right, so I have mics. Okay, wherever the mic is, just so y'all know, is where I'm going, and so you need to know that. Okay, yeah.
Okay, my question is, under the new real estate commissions, how do I ensure the listing realtor has my fiduciary interest in part, and what is the range of commissions on the listing side?
Okay, so the question is, how do you know if the real estate agent you hire has your fiduciary interest? If they are your fiduciary, your interest. And the commissions question, how are real estate commissions determined? Is that the second part of that?
What's the range?
What's the range? Gotcha, okay. Chris?
My mic was taken away from me. Yeah, my mic was taken away from me, so it's okay. So that's a great question. And I'm going to go with some customary ideas of numbers and kind of what we see around here. Because there is no set commission. You can negotiate it down to 0 if you can. If they'll take 0, you go for it. But customarily, what you're typically seeing is anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 on the listing side.
Percent of sales price.
Percent of sales price. So if it's $200,000, it's an easy number for me to work with. At 3% is $6,000. At 2.5 is 5, and at 3.5 is 7. So that's only the one side of the transaction. Now, due to the decoupling that we went through last year that was required by the lawsuit, we don't offer buyer compensation directly through MLS. We don't promote that. Be expected to pay it. Buyers are asking for it on I'm not gonna say every transaction, but doggone close.
It's considered kind of like a closing cost
It
now.
is, but it's not labeled as that when we look at concessions. So that's what it is. And so it's gonna be similar on the other side. So understand, all of it's negotiable, and there's a range to play with. So I don't think I have a solid answer for you, but I can give you a range to play with.
Okay, so but then the other part of his question I want to make sure we address is the fiduciary part. Because guys, every state, by the way, has different laws around this. So please understand, not only does the state have different laws about brokerage, brokerages themselves have different policies for the agents under their umbrella, okay? Follow me? And so Chris?
The state does have a form that you will sign that's a disclosure form. And it is kind of the basic criteria that we have to do. We can't give away information about our client to the other side. We can't treat you unfairly. It's very basic in that aspect. It's a step up from a functionary, meaning someone who just does the job, but not quite, in my opinion, a full fiduciary watching out for your best interest. What we have found, and I'll use myself as an example, but I believe someone else either next to me would agree, is that other agents may not like us because we advocate for our client. And they get irritated with us because we're not giving in to what they want, because they want a transaction, and we want what's best for our client. So there's just a different things about that out there. So you've just got to be very comfortable with finding a fiduciary. And I think that's the perfect word that we need to be using, because we can't use the word agent in that true capacity in Oklahoma.
Okay, so in the state of Oklahoma, a realtor can represent both sides, okay? But they have to disclose. So that means they have to disclose to the seller that I'm representing the buyer, and they have to disclose to the buyer that I'm the listing agent for this. Different, he said again, different agents have different practices. I can tell you my practice, I'm a listing specialist. I represent about 99% of just sellers. And occasionally, once or twice a year, I will represent a seller, so I use that part of my brain. But 99% buyer. See, I can't even do it. I can't use the word. But I will help a buyer, so I use that part of my brain. But I don't traditionally represent the buyer. If somebody comes and wants me as the listing agent to represent the buyer, I will refer them out to another buyer's agent that specializes in that, so that they are fully represented for their transaction, and my seller is fully represented as my undivided attention. That's a preference.
Okay, yeah.
When you're looking for a real estate agent, it's very important that you interview, check reviews, ask for references. I'm more than happy to provide references.
Yeah.
Shannon is as well. And the average real estate agent, I don't know, Corey may know this, but the average real estate agent last year sold somewhere around 8 houses a year.
6 to 10, depending on.
Oh, Corey's saying 4. Not very many houses. So, as far as human nature goes,
How many homes did you sell last year?
95.
Okay. Chris, how many homes did we sell last year? Roughly 60?
Yeah. So if someone is if that's their only contract, and they got bills to pay,
Right.
where might their loyalties lie?
They just want to get the deal done.
Right. If you're working with someone who has multiple files, that shows experience. It shows the fact that I'm gonna get my bills paid whether I sell, you know what I mean? I'm gonna look out for your best interest.
And by the way, I play devil's advocate here, because guys, we're in an industry that, we have great colleagues, and there's a lot of really good real estate agents out there. But there are also, like in every industry, bad apples, right? And I would say to you that if somebody tells you that they sold X number of houses, I would like to see a report, please. Seriously. Because anybody can tell you they sold that many houses. But ask them to show you something that says that they did that is different. And so just be really, really clear. Just like the guy in the senior living community can call himself whatever he wants, unless you check into that, that's just marketing, you guys. Okay, Danielle, back there.
My air conditioner was installed in 2014. Will an inspector require me to replace it before selling?
Oh, good question. Air conditioner was installed in 2014. Would a home inspector require him to replace it before selling. Does it work? Don't know yet.
A
Okay.
home inspector cannot require you to fix anything. If someone says my house failed inspections, that's not a thing. House can't fail inspections. So now if the buyer asks you to replace the air conditioner, that is a negotiation. It's going to depend heavily on second, maybe third opinion. Let's look into that. It's a negotiation. You cannot be required to do that.
And a good solution to that is get it serviced, make sure it's working and working order, and a home warranty.
Okay, right here.
Several of us are at the point of deciding whether it's time to move to an independent or assisted living. Okay, in order to maximize among the many other things to consider, can you tell me how often does the market shift? Is there a way of predicting so that we can make the most out of it?
Yeah, make hay while the sun shines, right? Okay, so you didn't hear the question. She said, there are people currently considering when is the right time to make a move into another arrangement, right? Retirement living, or in other words, no longer owning a home. How do you time the market? How do you know if the market's going to shift again? How do you not know if it's going to shift again? How do you know when you should do it? Becky?
It is impossible to time the market. It's impossible. Even inspectors cannot time the market. So what you can do, or I'm not inspectors, investors. Even investors cannot time the market. So what I suggest you do is look at yourself and what is the best for you. The best time for you to sell your home is when it's the best time for you to sell your home. And then find someone who will advocate for you and get you the best deal in the current market.
I also, so I have another question here, but before we go to that one, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
So on that, there are multi-billion dollar, we're talking $100 billion, even $1 trillion companies that are trying to time the market, and they bought a lot of houses in 2021, 22, and they're losing their shorts. So there are well-educated people that make bad decisions. So there is no way to answer that question, because as soon as you know it's the top, it's already too late, it's already going back down.
Well, and even beyond that, I think, like right now in the world that we live in, guys, interest rates are on the news all the time. Interest rates, interest rates, interest rates. Guess what? People buy houses all the time. It doesn't matter what the interest rates are. I bought my first house. My house was 9.5% interest. How many of you bought a house for more than 10% interest on your mortgage? How many of you 20% interest on a mortgage? Okay, so people buy houses, so that is not a good determinant of the market. I was gonna say just, okay, we'll go to that question. Go ahead, Danielle.
Can you depend on Realtor.com or Zillow if you go on there and see what your house is worth?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that question.
I'll take that one.
Okay, so can you, okay, so not only can you rely on Zillow or Realtor.com to get the value of your home, but if you can't, why not?
Okay, well, so where you're getting that data, where Zillow and Realtor.com, you can rely on it, but you need to rely on it based on their own self-professed error rate plus or minus. Their self-professed error rate plus or minus is 10%. So the number they're giving you could be 10% high, it could be 10% low, or it could be right. So or somewhere in between. They are only pulling the data based on a circumference, and it's just a circle, not even your own neighborhood. It could be yours and a little bit of the neighborhood next to you. And it has no idea if you have a new roof. It has no idea if you have a bad roof. It has no idea if you have a new air conditioner, if you just got new flooring. It knows none of that. It's straight average. So it is a tool. So I will not slam it. I will tell you it's a tool. But it's a tool that you need to know the parameters. To get the right values, you take that as part of your tool, and then you begin asking questions, and you have your house evaluated by a professional, a real estate professional, to get the comps within your neighborhood.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add is I've never heard of anybody in a lawsuit over overvaluing property. Zillow can't say that. So that's what I'm saying. It's.
They've been sued for overvaluing property.
Right.
Yes. Okay, I know we have lots of questions. So here's the deal. I'm gonna take the last question back there because she's got the mic. But anybody that has a question, these guys are going to be going, where are you gonna be? Right over here to answer questions about this topic. all the other education partners are gonna be back there for you to pick up their materials and greet them and chat with them. And there's also a place on your feedback form for you to write questions that you had that you'd like someone to follow up with you about. Okay, Danielle.
My question is, I need a little bit more clarification regarding clothing costs. And I always thought when a buyer wanted clothing costs is because they really didn't have enough money to really purchase the house. Then you mentioned that in closing costs, you can accept it, reduce it, or modify it.
Accept it, reject it, or modify it. Yeah.
Reject it or modify it. But I want to know as a seller, what is the best one to accept? Am I going to lose the buyer because I don't accept closing costs?
Good question, Betty. Okay.
That is a good question.
So start with so her assumption that she thinks of when she thinks, okay, buyers want me to pay closing costs, is that they don't have enough money to buy the house. And then the second part of that was obviously, what should I do if I get asked?
That is a common assumption. Know that if they are pre-qualified, that lender has checked to make sure whether or not they can purchase the house. Now, sometimes the lender will call us and say, they qualify, they can afford their payments, they don't really have enough in reserves to pay all of their closing costs, so they must have that to buy a house, okay? So, my suggestion on what should you do, you need to look at your bottom line. That's the most important thing, because they can negotiate your price up in order. I like for people to think, and I explained it to my buyers this way too. When a buyer is asking for closing costs to be covered, I like for my buyer to think about that as they are negotiating that into their mortgage. Right? Because if you would pay $10,000 in closing costs, you would have taken $10,000 off the price of your house because you care about your bottom line, right? So they're taking that $10,000 and spreading it out over the life of their loan, okay? So my suggestion to you is to see, like, is that the only offer you have, right? If that's the only offer you have, then let's try and negotiate it, right? But if it doesn't get your bottom line to where your bottom line needs to be, then have that conversation too.
You know, my favorite, go ahead.
Your bottom line is the most important thing.
Yeah.
That's what it is. How you get there is irrelevant. So the first thing I would tell you is, don't be irritated, don't be bothered by, don't have the stance of I'm not paying any of that. It doesn't matter. It's about how you get there.
Yeah.
And it's also, people have the same kind of cognitive biases towards specific financing, whether it be FHA or VA. It really doesn't matter. At closing, it's cash to you.
And so last question, Chris, on that thing that Betty asked. So let's say somebody offers $200, they want $3,000 in closing costs. Can you add that to the sales price?
Yeah, if it'll price for that.
As long as the house is
If
still
the value is there for the
See,
neighborhood, yes.
So my point is, a good agent is going to know how to get your bottom line where it needs to be and juggle the numbers so that it works for the buyers too, right? Now, did they do a fantastic job? Yeah?